HTML has attributes. Similarly, React components also have a similar concept known as props, which is short for properties. Let's take a look at how that works. We'll go ahead and create a new heading component. We'll create a new folder called components, and I'll create a new file called headings.jsx inside here. And now remember what I said in a previous video, to create a React component, we have to export a function inside this file, which is something similar to our app.jsx. That means every time we want to create a new React component, we have to include all this boilerplate, which is rather tedious. As a lazy developer, this is a big no-no. What can we do instead is to go to the extension panel and search for ES7, and we will install this amazing extension that can take care of the boilerplate easily for us. So once you have installed it, let's go back to our file, and we want to create a React functional component, so we can type in RFC and hit tab. There you go. This is just pure magic. And notice that the function name is exactly the same as our file name. How cool is that? The only thing though, since React 18, we no longer need to import the React modules on every component. So you can omit line 1 if you want. Anyway, for now, let's try to load our custom heading component into our app.jsx. VS Code is quite intelligent with React component import. So to import our heading component, we simply need to use an angle bracket and type in the component name, which is heading. You can see here from the drop down, we simply need to hit tab in order for us to import the component. And upon closing the tag, VS Code will close the tag for us as well. And now if we look at the import section of the file, you can see that our heading component is imported inside this file. How cool is that? We don't need to import our component manually, and we can just let VS Code do the work for us. Anyway, let's go to the browser now. And we can see that our component is now inside the DOM. Beautiful. And now let's talk about props. It would be nice if we can customize the size of the heading just by passing in some sort of options to our heading component. So the code will look something like this. This is the concept of props. As you can see here, it looks exactly like HTML attribute. We are essentially passing in additional data into our React component. And that means we need a way for the heading component to receive the incoming data. And the answer is inside the function argument. So every React component will receive an argument which will contain all the props that was passed to this component. I'll show you what I mean. If I console log out the prop, you can see that in the browser console, we are able to see an object with one property size in it, which is exactly the data that we pass to our heading component. If I were to pass in more props to our heading component, then the prop object will grow larger and larger. Anyway, the size property should determine the size of our heading. Let's apply an inline style to our heading. In contrast to normal HTML, in React, we need to pass in an object for the inline style, just like what I am doing here. And VS Code will provide you the corresponding autocomplete to make our life easier. All the property names has to be camel case, so just be aware of that. And one more thing to take note of, you notice that the console log comes in pair. But we only console log out the props once only in this component. This is an intentional behavior triggered by something called the strict mode in our app. Essentially, strict mode will always render our DOM for twice with the purpose of rendering our component deterministically so we can catch any bugs early on. The idea is a component should behave the same no matter how many times you run it. So strict mode helps us to catch any bugs in case something works differently in a second render. By default, strict mode is always on, as you can see inside the main JSX file. If you want to turn off strict mode, feel free to remove the strict mode wrapper component here. Anyway, let's go back to our app.jsx, and now if we change the size of the heading into something else, you can see that in our browser, our heading grows bigger. And if you look at the component API here, with JSX, it's very intuitive and easy to work with. Some other useful props that might be worth implementing includes color and alignment. I'll leave that as an exercise for you and see if you can figure it out. Now at the moment, our heading component is pretty shit because we're hard coding the text content of the heading. A better component design would be displaying whatever text content that we put within the component's opening and closing tags. Now we can retrieve this data from a special prop called children. as you can see here inside the console log. So the children prop of any React component refers to whatever that we have put in between the opening and closing tags. Let's refactor our heading component. So the content of the h1 should be props.children. And it works. We can really pass in any sort of data as a prop to a React component, including functions, object array, boolean, number, and etc. And now you might be asking, what's the use of passing all this data type to a component? It's a long answer, but you'll find out more as we dive deeper into this series. But for now, I can give you a short example to demonstrate how passing a function as a prop could be useful. Now suppose you want to make our custom heading component clickable. So when a user clicks on a heading, you might want to redirect them to a different website or different part of the page. So what we might want to do is to attach a click event listener to the h1 element so that it will trigger a custom prop function that will pass to this component. Let's do that. So back inside App.js, I'll pass in a new prop called click to the heading component and attach a custom function to it. Then we'll go to our heading component and add an onClick event listener where the value will be the click prop function that we pass to this component. So now when the heading is clicked, it will trigger the click prop function that was passed to this component, which was defined inside App.js. And now just for demonstration, I'm going to console log out hey ya in the say hello function and go ahead and click on heading. And now in the browser console, we can see hey ya gets printed out. And that is a simple demonstration on how a prop function can be useful. There's one last thing that I want to talk about before we end the lesson, which is something called the single root principle in React. The single root principle says that every React component should have one and only one root element. Let me demonstrate this principle to you. Let's go to our heading component. If I attempt to return two root elements, React will be super unhappy about it, as you can tell from all the errors that it is spitting out at the moment. However, sometimes there are instances where we really want to have two root elements. There is a workaround for this. It's something called the ghost template or the fragment component, which is basically an empty tag that looks something like this. The fragment tags are virtual tags that will not add any node to the DOM, and yet it will still fulfill the requirement of the single root principle. It serves as a great workaround in situations where you want to return multiple children, but didn't really want to wrap them all in a single parent. Alright, that was a quick introduction to props. It will probably take a while to wrap your head around the syntax, so take your time with that. I'll see you in the next one. Key takeaways for this lesson. Props are external data passed to a React component. You can think of props as HTML attribute, but for React components, we can pass any kind of data type as props to a React component. Props children refers to the content that we pass within the component tags. Fragments or ghost templates are virtual tags that will not actually create a node in the DOM when the components was rendered. Components need to comply with the single root principle. In other words, every component should return one and only one root element. That's it for now, and I'll see you again in the next video. If you enjoyed the content of this video, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the bell icon for more content to come. It will really help me out. Thanks for the support.